The last time that I attended a church building was when uh, when I was attending the church of the pastor that took me in when I was homeless. Long story short, I ended up unemployed, no longer cutting hair in a barbershop or doing anything for that matter. For for clarity, probably what was more, I guess you can say, more in tune with me being clinically depressed at that time. Um, Ended up with me no longer able to pay the way for my sick father, my terrestrial father at that time, uh, my elderly grandmother, and my mother. It was at a time where inflation was gradually picking up, and a little bit of money that I was making wasn't enough to even help out, even with their government checks at the time, which it was something that my mother thought that it was gonna be beneficial. Mind you, I'm very young. I'm just entering my 20s, and and I had already been struggling for a while. I was depressed. I was very lowly in heart while I'm trying to be a person and carrying the weight of basically of parents and that didn't do much for me to begin with. Um, the bare minimum, I would say. So I a series of events led us to my grandmother ending up in an elderly home, my father, my terrestrial father, ending up in a place that could take care of him in his sick situation at the time too. He was sick with emphysema, and he had already several episodes, and we had already lived together for several years at that time. Probably the longest that I've ever spent next to my dad was towards the end of his life. Granted, that was something that I know that God, that the Father, my heavenly Father, arranged for me. I've came to understand. And again, I'm trying to summarize, I'm trying to paint you a different picture there. Long story short, chain of events came to them ending up my grandmother and my dad, which were the government checks that were coming in to help with the living situation between all four of us, me, my mother, my dad, and my grandmother. And it wasn't enough. And I was already at the peak, living in a big city, being the only one working in a household of four where electricity doesn't stop because everyone's home. My mother wasn't working. She hadn't for many years. As as I was basically the only income before that living situation, living alone with my mother. The government checks that were coming in because of my quote unquote condition. Uh, she took me to psychiatrics, to shrinks, and ended up because of depression and issues that I had growing up because of the unstable mental environment that I lived in. She managed to get milk out the system as much as possible out of my quote unquote condition. Even try to put me on a drug, or she was complicit of putting me on a drug, psychiatric a drug at a time, uh, to get more money out of the government, which I didn't like at all, and I had to make a very strong stance at a very young adolescent age on why I didn't want to be on that drug because they would have kept me on that. She was sneaking in my milk before going to school. I digress. Long story short, we ended up homeless, me and my mother together. Uh, she managed to milk out the system and get some kind of government voucher for us to be in in a low income, basically just so that we wouldn't be sleeping in the streets. And in the midst of that, while we're staying in a dirty motel that was the cheapest place that we could stay in, I have very little mental energy to even pick up a part time. I'm like burned out at this point from trying to be a person and trying to care for folks that show very little appreciation to, being a young person at that. I'm already burned out at this point. And whether she understood that or not, which I don't know that she ever will understand or even appreciate what I gave. But I digress. Um, at that point, I had one good friend that I knew from childhood. He would come around and he made sure that I got something to eat and he would help me out. And those were very trying times for me. And I remember another friend of mine that I had from the beginnings of me going to church after I made the prayer, after I answered the call, because the Father had been reaching out to me in many, what some would call supernatural ways. In many ways, the Father had been reaching out to me in a very not conventional form. So I answered that call, and I had already been to this one church that I had. It was a different church from the first church I went to initially in my walk, when I started my walk, and I kept in that. For some reason that place kept coming up to mind, and it was several miles from where we were staying in that motel when I was homeless. And the Father told me He would speak to me and with the word, and He told me those that ask you to go with them 1 mile, go with them 2. And He told me whatever they ask you, whatever they ask of you, go and do. And I was at a point in time where I was like, I had nothing else that I cared to strive for. I was any relationship that I might have, a girlfriend that I had at the time, all of that fell apart. All that, I had no desire my will to live was very low. So there was a moment of desperation, I remember, in that motel room, that I felt like the scariest thing. Mind you, I wasn't on drugs, I wasn't drinking. This was this was a very sober state, okay? This had nothing to do with any controlled substance or any illegal substance or anything that you may imagine. I've never had an issue with drugs, okay? Just to make that clear. And even the times of drinking at that time, it was recreational. And yeah, I did find myself at times drinking to forget, as a lot of people know it to be, but it was never something that I was overtaking the situation at any point. I spent a lot of time sober. So drug use has never been a factor in my story, in any part of my life. So I ended up going to that church. I would walk those miles. I did a lot of walking, and in those walks I would talk to the Father and meditated state or prayer, however you like to call it. I would speak to my Father as I was still living in that motel. Very little to eat, I wasn't eating very much, so I was very thin. Again, not because of drugs, because I didn't do any drugs, but simply because I wasn't eating. I was just drinking water, and probably more in a intermittent fast, whatever it is that word is. I was doing more fasting than anything else, fasting and walking, and I ended up listening to the voice of the Spirit after I went through a the most scariest thing that I've experienced in my life, which was the feeling of the Father's presence fleeing from me. And as I have shared before, some of my videos, that was the scariest thing. Again, I am just sharing my experience. I don't expect everyone to have an understanding of what I'm saying, but in a very spiritual, perceptive place in my life, that's how I felt. I felt like the Father had turned his face, and it was very scary. It was a very scary thing. I can't describe. It's very difficult for me to describe what that felt like. But imagine you being, I guess, a little kid and knowing your parents being your guardians and knowing them to be your everything, and then finding yourself going somewhere to an island or to a desolate desert or something far away, and them disappearing and you finding yourself completely alone. Something to that degree. That's how I felt. I felt like I was alone. And that's when I started to seek him the hardest. And until he answered, he replied. And when he did that, I paid the most attention, and that's how I ended up in that church that I remembered that I had visited a couple times with that other friend of mine, that I had met in the first church that I started my walk in. So So I started going and I started attending that place. And long story short, I ended up joining the singing, the choir, little by little. They learned about my situation, and little by little, the Father started showing me what was to come. Not because not because I was asking or I was desiring anything from anyone. I wasn't asking anything from anyone, but because these were the steps that the Father was laying out in front of me, and I was basically, I became something that they needed. And long story short, the time of that government voucher for our stay at that dirty motel was expiring, and it came from the pastors to offer me a place within their dwelling, you know, to stay in their personal home. And they saw me and took care of me as one of their own children. And I was the utmost appreciative. And I worked for the pastor for free. The pastor had a concrete company, concrete pump company. He had several pickup trucks with the pumps, and he would wake up at 4:30 in the morning, you know, or sometimes even earlier than that, to be on the site before the sunrise. And I was even more helpful than his own, you know, son, his oldest son, which was the one that knew the most about the business, since he would take him since he was young. And I would wake up whenever his oldest son wouldn't wake up. I would wake up every day, and I would go help him. Every once in a while, he would give me a little bit of money just so that I can have some money in my pocket. But they fed me. I shared a bed with one of their sons, you know, and they treated me like family. And I will always be grateful for that, even though because of indoctrination and because of religious doctrine, we ended up parting ways. But I digress. I was very grateful, and I showed my gratitude by doing anything that they asked of me, from helping them in their ministry, to being a hand and in the jobs that the pastor had. So that was the church where I met my wife. I met her there, and she was in her journey of wanting to change her life, and she was tired of her lifestyle, of, you know, of the way that she was living. And she was in the process of seeking the Father, and she had already an encounter with the Father. She was in the process of starting that relationship with Yah, with Yeshua, and learning. And she had many letdowns herself at that point. And when we first met, you know, we didn't like each other. You know, we didn't like see each other in any type of way. You know, our friendship started before anything started, and it was basically we're getting to know each other type of thing. But it was a very organic, no interest. I have no interest in anything type of relationship. As a matter of fact, she was starting to be part of the choir, which I ended up being the lead of at that time. And she didn't really like me because of the way that I presented myself. Because I had an attitude of, I don't want to be here. And I was like, it was, you could read it off of me. I have an attitude of I'm only here because the Father wants me to be here, but I don't want to be here type of attitude, you know. And I was trying my best to help people that really weren't, not to say that I'm the most talented, musically inclined at best, but, and I have a very good ear for music, but when it came to like exercising the arts, I can't say that I'm like up there with the greats, you know, so to speak. But I was trying to the best of my ability to guide the chorus, since I understand what a first, second, and third voice sounds like, what harmony is, and I have a melodic sense, you know. I understand music just because it's just a gift that the Father gave me. But I at that time, you know, she didn't see me as anything in the very beginning. It's something that evolved down the line. So that was the church. That was the last church building that I was led to by the Spirit of the Father, solely, directly by the Spirit of the Father, to get involved with. And that came to an end when me and my wife eventually it ended up getting together. It came to an end because there were conflicts of interest, I guess. I don't know what else to call it. I was clearly being led, you know, with my wife, you know, and which is my wife today. And there was disagreements with the pastors, and I guess they saw something for me that I didn't, you know, they wanted something for me that I didn't see. The Father wasn't leading me to, and I needed to follow the Spirit of the Father, and that's what I did. And I was already having conflicting arguments, doctrine based and biblically based arguments that we were disagreeing upon, because again, when I start showing people with the word what Christ is saying and what he did in accordance to what they're doing when they're running a church, it doesn't line up, right? So it was no different than the first church that I went to, which I ended up being exiled from because of differences in opinion, if you want to call it that. So years pass by. I have tried at that point. I no longer going to the same church. My wife felt hurt and rejected, so she's going through her first letdown when it comes to religion. She's learning what religion is because she's experiencing that from religious people that she thought she could trust in, and they were there for her benefit and spiritual guidance. And she's going through her first letdown of the sort, right? So we still have our heart set and our belief in the Father, and we'll pray, you know, but we are very very separate from the churchy environment, you know. Mind you, this is in a big city, so the denominations and branches of Christianity, as you would know them in a big city church, Pentecostal, you know, mostly Pentecostal background and things like evangelical, things like that, and which correlate a lot with that prosperity gospel type of preaching. So at some point in time, as time passes, and me and my wife have already been together for a bit, uh, before the birth of my second son. Um, we have it in us to let's go seek out an American church. Let's go, let's go take the drive up north to the the northern side uh, of our area. Let's go. Let's drive that 45-minute drive. And I have heard great things. I remember going to this church one time when I was younger, and in passing with the first church that I ever went to. It was a youth event, and I remember feeling it was such a beautiful feeling, and the Father touched me, and let's go over there. Let's go see what that's about. So we give it a try. We go out there a couple times. The American experience, lobby, coffee bar, and bagels and donuts early in the morning, and right before the service starts, and it felt welcoming and it felt free, and you would just go. They wanted your information every time you go in, but they weren't too pushy, They would just open the lobby doors and they would just allow you to walk in and receive. I didn't give any money, and they had seen her face already a couple of times, and we would just go and receive, because in my heart, as the Father puts it in my heart, okay, the the experience should be an organic one, right? Not attached to any monetary value or any monetary uh, gain, or not driven by money at all. Even though I understand that these buildings, it takes money to run these buildings and all of that sort, but in my mind, I am looking for a fellowship of like-minded individuals, of people have that are seeking the same love of Christ that I see, that Christ shows me. So we're going there, and before long, I start to see that there's a very uniformed program around this very benevolent looking, welcoming looking scenario in this building, in this church building, and I start to see that, you know. So we won't go every we weren't going every Sunday, which was Sunday was the main service. They had several services, and on Sunday they would run, I think, 2 or 3 services spread out throughout the day. Um, and we would try to catch the early morning one, if not the early morning, the mid afternoon one. Um, Eventually, our second son is born, and he's just a toddler, and we go and we take him, and they put him in the little daycare thing, and while we're there, and we have that experience. But just to come to the conclusion that it had more to do with a business than an actual brother fellowship. The the uh, the ushers started getting a little more, you know, pushy, I guess, more trying to get us to like become a part of, I guess now, signing up for things and giving information and and to a point where the pastor, the main pastor, which we would see in the early morning or early afternoon, he approached me and uh, and he would ask us just very direct questions. You know, he asked us if we were married, um, and and at that time I started to realize that that what they wanted was another paying seat, another paying butt on a chair, you know. So that started to diminish, and not because I had any issue, not because I had any issue uh, with helping out a cause, you know, monetarily, because I had done that already a lot, you know, in the places that I had started from. I had given up my time and given up my wallet quite a bit, wholeheartedly feeling in my heart that it was for a good cause, when all they're doing is taking advantage of your humble heart. Sadly, that's the reality. So, fast forward, you know, we stopped going there. We stopped going anywhere. That was the last. That was the last hope. Uh, we'll we'll watch several preachers here and there, you know, online. Uh, every once in a while, might pick up the book. I would always talk. I always spoke about the Father, you know, to my family, to my wife, and we would still have conversations, and you know, and speak about things and share the word with one another. Not in a conventional, as you know it, as we would know it to be conventional way. But we will open the book here and there, you know, and God, the Spirit of the Father, was still being a factor in our life, whether uh, whether it seemed kind of dimmed or not. Always guiding our steps in our life at that time. So fast forward, I'm in a I'm already in a I'm again in a dark state where I'm like I'm just existing at this point. I've picked up a night gig uh, in a front desk uh, after doing several security jobs and things like that, and I'm in a private condominium, basically supervising the place overnight graveyard shift, uh, which is detrimental to your health. It's not healthy, but mentally, it was easier for me mentally to deal with life, and I'm basically just existing at this point because I have the blessing of the family that the Father gave me, and I'm trying not to take that for granted, you know, even though I'm like asking the Father for answers because I have none for my life at this point, other than just I have to be here because I have a family that you gave me, you know, and and I'm starting to watch, you know, at a certain point in time, in my seeking for the Father, I start to watch even at work. There's a lot of downtime in between watching security cameras and answering tenants' calls or or managing the valet, you know, or things of that sort. There's a lot of downtime, so I'll have like an earplug in and I'll be listening to some preachers, and there were some that I would still esteem highly from the beginning of my walk, mainstream, couple of mainstream, because a lot of the pastors that you know that and a lot of the preachers that I listened to in the beginning of the walk, I came to realize what it was all about. There was very few that still hadn't fallen from grace in my understanding, you know. So as long as the word's being spoken, you know, it doesn't return void. So Spirit of the Father started building me up a little bit there, just in my at work, you know, in those night sessions, just listening to the word and seeking and praying. And long story short, it comes to the point where I start to see that even those very couple of preachers are, the Father starts to show me, and I'm like falling right back again. Not because I'm seeking to find a man to follow, but because I'm yearning for what many of us yearn for, which is to have a fellowship, to have a like-minded community of individuals, this, to give you, it's not important, and I won't glorify any names, but this pastor was in Texas, and the church was a very well-known mainstream church, and the thought even crossed my mind of maybe that's where we're supposed to be, maybe I should talk to my wife about relocating to Texas just so that we can be close to that. And there was it was a thought that flew through my brain, came in and went out. It didn't linger for very long. It wasn't it wasn't the Father's plan. So that fell, that fell from grace. That fell from even an idea to the point where I was already like no longer receiving or able to receive anything from this man, because I saw beyond what others see. And again, I fell back on that sense of wanting to belong, and I'm asking the Father again, what is it? Why am I still here? What do you want? Why do you insist of keeping me here? And shortly after that, in my passion for firearms and and the videos that I was watching, the whole prepper aspect of the lifestyle, because even though I'm of Cuban descent, and I'm of Hispanic or Latin descent, however you want to label me, I've always been driven towards a more Americanized style of lifestyle, so then I start noticing that there's these quote unquote prepper movements, and it started very just very organic, very not organic, superficial, very over the top, just just regular old preppers. If I start to give you YouTube names that you will probably recognize, like gun tubers, like Such, he would come up with a prepper video. There were like dudes that would do videos of flashlights, and then that felt, because I would research and look at all the best products that were out, and things to put together, and things like that. And I was always listening to reviews and opinions of others that have used stuff in the field, and and stuff like that. So, and just because it was things that I would use at work, or I use in my personal life, and I would carry. I've always been big on EDC, on everyday carry items. So that somehow dragged into my feed, into the whole prepper movement, and that pesky devil, let me tell you, the algorithm, which is it's an AI system, as we know it to be artificial intelligence, which is an oxymoron, because if it's artificial, it can't be intelligent. Yeah, but anyways, came to a full circle where a prepper guy that happened to be a believer, and in a different area of belief, in a different area of um, doctrine that I hadn't yet experienced, popped in my feed. And those that know exactly what I'm talking about. Uh, for others, it really doesn't matter. But it was more of a rural type of prepper, uh, more of a Baptist background Christianity, but claiming to be separate from the denominations type of situation. And that individual popped in my feed, and I started paying attention. Before, it was something that the Spirit was leading me to. Before that individual even declared on a video that I had watched that he was a believer, and had biblical fundamentals and things like that. Even before that, I started watching like backpack, rucksack videos, and just prepper style. And I started getting, because I was getting into that prepper thing style of educating myself into that. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I had never thought of. I had, I had the, I had the gun thing. I thought for the most part down packed, and sidearm and main boom stick, and assembly and disassembly, and and the importance of keeping your boom stick clean, and uh, you know and proper handling and safety and all of the protocols when it came to that, right? And utilizing it correctly, utilizing it by yourself, utilizing it as a team. I had been instructed and educated, went through the task of educating myself as much as I could, whether getting a little bit of help here and there, or on my own, seeking information on my own. And but I had never thought of the prepper aspect of that world, So that this was something that it all came together at once, as one. So I found this individual, and that was very that really popped at me, because I'm here hungry for meaning. I'm hungry for meaning in my life, and for a drive, period. And I'm looking for a place where I could say, these are my people, because I have none, other than my family, So, long story short, I find that these individuals, they have a very, as it presented itself, they're individuals that are very broad, very open, very welcoming to others that are looking for the same thing. They're looking for a way out of the 9 to 5 hustle and bustle, devil sanctioned system, that drowns you and taxes you to no end. This is how this movement is presenting itself, and they're believers, and their driving factor is the Spirit of the Father, right? This is as I saw it, as I saw them presenting themselves, So I'm like, this people, So I start thinking, you know what? That's what I need. That's what we need. We need to find ourselves in a group like that. Not thinking that group in specific was going to be the group, but but we need to find. So me and my wife land with the conviction that we have to get out of the big city, and we start scouting. And when I tell you, we spent all the money that we could gather to take these trips. We went all around. We went to most of the southern states, Georgia, waiting to to feel the Father and to talk and to have the Father speak to us, and put boots. We put feet on the ground in most of the southern states. Uh, you know, with the exception of maybe a couple. And long story short, in one of those trips, we ended up landing in the state where these folks are in. In our journey of traveling those states, most of those southern states, one of them happens to be where we were like, well, we're here, considering one of the areas that we had considered in a neighboring state. We were like, well, we got this far, we might as well go and pass through, do a quick Google search of the LLC, leading you straight to an office at that time of where this individual was running his business that he had. And we had an encounter there, and which was very very impactful for me and very meaningful for me, and it triggered a lot of central nervous system motor functions, as I had a lot of issues with anxiety and dealt with a lot of emotional instability. That not because I was an explosive individual and doing things or emotionally driven, but because I struggled with I struggle with PTSD type of symptoms. Okay, so time passes. We have that encounter. We were like, man, that was something, and it was where we felt at that moment. We felt in that encounter. After that encounter, we felt like the trip was over. It was like, this is what we came here. I felt like the trip was complete after many of the states. Mind you, when I tell you, I can't explain how we feel the Spirit talking to us, but me and my wife both felt the same thing at the same time. We felt like we went full circle, and we felt like that was the reason why we embarked, even though it was not even part of what we had planned out in our trip. It was just as a side, we're not even thinking of being over here with these folks or anything of that sort. We're thinking of doing it on our own, mimicking what we felt convicted to, from what these individuals were presenting, not thinking we were going to end up there at all. But we felt like our trip was over. So now we have all that to digest on our ride home and on our way back home. And long story short, we ended up making a connection because my wife was attending Bible studies online with the women group. She would interact more than I did. I was very, very reserved. I wouldn't go to their men's ministry, men's retreat, or anything like that. My wife was being the one that, your wife is on board. That's like, that's one of the things that my wife. There was no issue with my wife being on board with anything. She was in the mindset. She was in spirit. She also felt received. So. Long story short, the time comes where the facilitation, okay, and what I mean by facilitation means that all the ships fall in place. The things that needed to happen in order for us to make that transition which is not a simple transition to make, especially on a low budget, because I wasn't getting paid the best. And I don't have any degrees or anything that I can just go pick up and go into a rural area and say, hey, I'm here, and uh, so all the facilitations with my wife's situation at the time, everything fell in place for us to make that transition, 1,400 miles away, and again, solely led by the Spirit of the Father. As a matter of fact, I didn't come to this conclusion until I literally saw a pin drop on the map in my thoughts, in my head. After trying several places in several states, I even, for a time, right towards the very end, where I completely gave up, even went and moved in with my buddy, a couple of 100 miles away within our same state of Florida, trying to find if that's the place where the Father wants us, only to not get the green light, not to get the gut check. After 2 weeks, I even got a job. I got a job in the post office, and I was in the middle of training, and like, it was just the Father just knocking me in the gut, telling me this is not the place. And mind you, doors wide open. My friends, family that lived a couple of 100 miles north within Florida, open. They love me like if I'm one of their own. Open doors for me, and and helped me out and fed me and everything, and they just cared for me, and it wasn't because I wasn't received, or it wasn't because I didn't have the job or the facilitations to make that transition. It was because that's not where the Father was leading us to be. So after 2 weeks of coming to that hard conclusion, I had to go back and tell my wife, because my wife's wheels were already spinning after so many trips that we had taken to several states. My wife's wheels were already spinning, and she thought that we were going to end up in that place within the same state. So I had to be a man, knowing, and the Father showing me already, she's not going to take this well. I had to be a man and tell her, listen, this is what I'm getting. This is not the place. Then where is it? I don't know. I don't know where the place is, but this is not the place. And I'm just as hurt as she is, because here we are as a younger couple. Well, I'm not so young at that point anymore, but here we are. We're trying to realize, we're trying to find out where it is that the Father, we have a conviction from the Father to disconnect from the toxic society that we have been born into, and we have not yet received a destination. So here we are, because we're very, very Spirit-led. We're very, very Spirit-led, which is something that apparently is very difficult for people to understand. But this is our life. We were put together by the Father on purpose, because we are both aligned, not because we're the greatest and most Bible read individuals, or because we're the best people on the planet, but because the Father lined us up that way. So we're individuals with a conviction. We're a family with a conviction that we need to get out of the toxic environment of Babylon, that as we know it to be, our Babylon. But we have not a destination yet. So I'm there, I'm Uber driving, I'm driving for Uber. At the time, it's the time of COVID, because I get canned from, I get pushed out of the environment that I'm in. That was a Father thing. Pushed me out of the place. I asked him, I was already feeling like he was telling me to get out, and I didn't know how to get out. And I guess you can call me a coward. I was like, I don't know where to go from here. I don't know what you want from me. And I said, you want me out of here? Get me out of here. And he did. In the funny way that he did that, he did. So ended up that I had nothing to fear. He provided. During COVID, nobody was Uber driving during COVID, but I did because I didn't fear. I decided not to fear. And I probably caught all the strands of COVID at that time driving for Uber. But I made great amount of money at that time for an entry level Uber driver. And I've always been a great driver, so driving wasn't an issue for me. And that lasted as long as I needed to last. And it was painful. I was praying every day. Every day I was asking the Father. Every day I was pleading with the Father, asking him, Father, just show me. I don't know where to go from here. I don't know what to do. Just show me. Show me where you want me to be. To the point where I was fed up. I was at my peak's end, and I told him, you're gonna have to show me a pin drop on the map. And at the time, my wife, like I mentioned, she was kind of friendly with some of the ladies that were running that women's ministry group online, and they were doing those Bible studies and stuff. So I was glad to tell her, listen, I know you talk to this lady a lot. I feel that you should ask her for guidance on where to move out there. But eventually I got a pin drop. So it was a command at this point. It was no longer, wherever we land. No, it had to be within this borderline and within this area. So without saying too much of location, it's not important, but it was a specific area. Mind you, me not knowing exactly where anyone is as far as this group is concerned or anything of that sort. Strictly spirit-led. Okay? I have to emphasize on that, because whether people believe me or not, it doesn't matter to me. I'm telling the truth. Because how dare you say that I'm lying about me being spiritually led. But anyways, you can believe whatever you want to believe. What I'm saying is the truth. Because I'm not telling these stories to gain any monetary wealth. I'm telling these stories because the Father told me to speak as a benefit, and if anything, as a guide or to anybody that needs to hear it. Okay, so spirit led. The Father finally shows me the pin drop on the map and shows me the person that one of the people that the Father had, that my wife had been close to in those online sessions of Bible studies and stuff. That was part of that group. So the process begins, and this person suggests, well, have you tried? Would you like to? Because it's going to be real difficult to find a place here and where you want to be. He was like, no, it has to be there, because that's where the Father said it needs to be. I was like, all right. Long story short, a couple of things fall apart. We even end up losing $1,000 in trying to secure a place that it was not where we needed to be across that borderline, and come to the week where we need to prepare. And I told my wife, listen, that's not the place, and we end up losing $1,000 trying to secure down payment for a place. And anyways, money's not important. What's important is that we do what the Father tells us to do. So within that period of time, we get invited to one of these Torah observant. I'm just painting you a broad picture for everyone that may come across this channel. feast. We we get invited to a Torah observant feast that this group is hosting, and we see that as well. This is I at first I didn't want to go because I have an issue with, it was just too overwhelming, and I told my wife, no, no, you can go, I'll stay, I'll watch the kids, because we couldn't all go. He goes, no, we should go, and I'm like, oh, if I am gonna go, it'll be something that both me and my wife can be invited to, because she had already been to a couple of the retreats, or she already been to one of the women's retreat, but I hadn't been to the men's retreat. So I figured if we're gonna go, I guess we'll go to one of these places that we can both be invited at the same time. Nevertheless, we go. I feel the Father in that situation, in the obedience of that. We rent a vehicle. We get out there. We see, we receive, we stay. We stay for a couple of days, and in the midst of that, we found a realtor that she had been dealing with in that area, and we find a place, and I felt it in my gut. I told her, listen, I feel that if we go back home without securing this living situation here, I feel like this trip was in vain, and it felt like disobedience at that point if we didn't. Internally, nobody was that I felt, nobody that I felt from that group or anywhere was influencing this situation. This was solely me and my wife and the Father. So we secured that, and come to around the third day, it was time for us to go home. And now the clock is ticking. We have 2 weeks to move from 1,400 miles away where we live to where we're going, right? Already have the place secured. So we do that. We go. It's a move. And we got way too much crap than we anticipated. If you know, you know. If you know, you know. So things starting to go weird. But not weird in the way that the Father was closing the door. Weird in the way that the enemy's trying to cause delays. But I'm stubborn. So, the SUV that we needed to rent with the trailer that we needed to rent to secure my motorcycle didn't come through on D-Day, mind you. So we already gave the keys away, and we're staying at my wife's mom's place for the night to embark on our 26-hour drive to where we're going, and which ends up being a day and a half in real time. But in reality, because of those hindrances that we had on the way, it ended up being more like 3 days. But nonetheless, we are now in the area where this group congregates, and we start slowly getting invited to things. I get offered a job by the main character of this group, and there I am. There we are, me, my 2 sons, and my wife, and we did what we felt the Father led us to do, and 100% Father led. And it didn't take very long for the Father to start showing me things, and for me to start realizing, for me to start feeling that emptiness again. And this is the reason why the Father needed to show me this side. I had already experienced the other side of the same entity. When I say entity, hear me out. is there is a religious spirit, a spirit of religion, a bondage. Religion is a bondage. Okay? I know it took me an hour and 5 minutes to get here, but religion is a bondage. Religion is a hindrance from an actual spiritual relationship with your Creator, the one that made you from the dust in which you will return in a physical form, the one that knew you before you entered the womb, in spirit and truth, the one that you are created in the image of. So the Father's not flesh and bone. The Father is spirit. We are created in the image of our Creator. Okay? So I needed to go and see that side because I needed to understand that the only one, as if I didn't get it, right? Because the one that had been leading me the whole time was the Spirit of the Father. The whole time, the whole entire time, had led my life to that point was the Spirit, is the Spirit of the Father. So I needed to get to that very, very point only to realize that there is nothing new under the sun. I found the same spirit of religion and manipulation of the word in that group that I found in the big city, in the groups, in churches, church buildings that I have found in the big city. It was no different. The only difference was the angle. These folks had chicken and sheeps. And they recited and manipulate to this day the Old Testament, which is the first section of the Bible, rather than manipulating mostly the New Testament. And here's a fun fact for those folks that are more on the first side of the book with a Baptist background that love to bash on the big city believers. Here's a fun factor. The big city believers manipulate the whole word. It just so happens that they also manipulate the New Testament, not just the first 5 books of the Bible. Okay, so there's a first-hand witness for you in that reality. Okay, big city preachers manipulate the whole Bible. Okay, countryside preachers manipulate the first 5 books of the Bible, and they kind of brush under the rug whatever Jesus said. That is the fact. Okay, as I have learned it to be. But this is not an attack on anybody. I'm just telling you the truth from a person that has no dog in the fight, because I don't have a label. I'm not a Torah observant Christian. I'm not a Christian because I don't take the religious label that anyone wants to put on me. Me and my family are not Christians. I am a Christ follower. And I am a child of God, of Yah. However it is that you know on to call onto the Creator. The only one true Creator. Okay? The King of Kings. So, I came that far. The Father brought me that far for that conclusion. To realize that religion is not a relationship with Him. To understand that there's nothing new under the sun. And to see in entirety the hearts of men. There's no such thing as a man. And I tell you this, and you can go to the Father in prayer, in spirit and truth, and ask Him to reveal this to you yourself. I'm not trying to discourage anyone that right now, I'm not trying to knock out all the stars off of your sky. I'm not trying to do that. I don't want to cause mental instability in you. I'm just telling you the truth as the Father has shown it to me. From a person that does not have any monetary interest or any hatred in my heart towards any group of people. I care about all human beings because Jesus Christ died for all human beings. And that's who I follow. And whatever your interpretation of what that is, I'm not here, has nothing to do with me. I can't stop you from believing whatever you want to believe. I'm just telling you from my witness. Okay? There is nothing new under the sun. Any man with a 501c3 government sanctioned certification is not in the business of bringing you closer to the Creator, to the Messiah. They're in the business of manipulating your perception of reality. They're in the business of manipulating the word, the holy text, so-called holy text, of the many translations of the book. It's funny that some denominations desire to use one version of that Bible rather than another. They're all the same patterns. The New King James Version and the New Living Translations are broadly used among the big city prosperity gospel. Mostly, big city prosperity gospel. And the countryside, from the Southern Baptist upbringing type of religious indoctrination, they rather use a copy called the Scriptures. It's the same patterns of behavior. I have yet to see, it's an anomaly. It's not an anomaly, it's an oxymoron. To find a man that is taking a handout from the government and a certification that is recognized by the government, that is actually leading you to the Spirit of the Most High. It is an oxymoron. I have witnessed it myself. And I don't care who says anything. In spirit and truth, those men reject Christ. Because if you're not following what Christ said, love God with all you got. Love your neighbor as yourself. If love is not the driven factor, if you worship a religion rather than to follow the command, the one sole command, new command that Christ gives you, the one that we call our Redeemer. If you cannot love one another, anything else you practice is worthless. That's in that book you read or that you hold. Probably in that latter section that folks ignore. These countryside folk. Again, I'm not trying to hate any, I'm not displaying hatred upon anybody. I'm just showing you the reality that you're living in. The reality you are living in is that there's nothing new under the sun. The devil has many tricks. Religion is one of his greatest. Getting you wrapped up in doctrines that have nothing to do with Christ. And doctrines that enslave you more than liberate you. They portray to be liberating doctrines. They portray to be, we're out here in the wilderness. We're out here in the rural, trying to be self-sustainable. No, you just joined the cult. Only not in the big city. You join a cult in the countryside. You just joined the cult. Even if the cult is just money, and you spit upon Christians or anybody that claims the name of Christ or any religion, a cult is a cult. A cult is something that drives you away. It's a structured set of rules that drive you away from a real relationship with your Creator through the guide of the sacrifice of the one true Redeemer, which is Jesus the Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach. That is a cult. A religion is not a relationship with your Redeemer, your blueprint back to the Creator. A religion is a set of rules that guides you away from that relationship. And that is a cult. Name your denomination of choice, or your denomination of preference, or that you have been indoctrinated, or upbringing, or that you knew to be. So yes, these folks now in the countryside that started with no real label now have a label and are no different than every other denomination or cult religion that leads you away from a true relationship with the Father. So I'm going to leave it right there for now. Again, I want to remind y'all, if y'all got this far, you cannot control me with your religion. I am not bound by your ideology of what righteousness is. You are living a dangerous, dangerous life. If you believe, anybody believes that they're going to attach themselves to these blind, spiritually blind guides that have these very hardcore set of biblical rules that they themselves do not follow accordingly, you are playing a dangerous game, because when the poop actually hits the fan and you are caught in one of these cults and you are not so favored or that useful or as useful as the other more useful individuals, and you transgress against the more useful individuals within that cult, when the poop hits the fan, you'll get stoned to death on a technicality, because they will manipulate the word to their advantage, and they will eliminate those that don't benefit them. The truth hurts. This is what I have come to find. There is no different. You have these folks that are so afraid of the big city. You will implode from the inside, because you're calling brethren those that you can't even stand, because you have not transformed. You have no renewal of your heart, because you don't know who Christ is, and you don't know what he represents. You don't know him because your fruits show that you do not know him. You do not follow the Redeemer. You follow a religion. You follow a cult set of doctrine and rules and regulations that will fall apart because the Spirit of the Father is not in it. And when the pressure sets in, it will fall apart. That's why I say, I respect everyone's opinion. But as for me and my household, we follow Christ, even unto death. I just won't follow another man into perdition. So you see, if I comply with any other man just because they feel lonely, if I try to console and to agree, I can't agree with another man's religious doctrine because I do not believe in it. I don't believe in man's given doctrine. I believe in everything that comes from the Spirit of my Father, my Heavenly Father, That's what drives my life. And that's how I've made it this far. So I'll respect you in your occultic belief. As long as you can respect me in my belief, however it is that you want to label it. Because if it is about the love of Christ, I have to love you, even if you don't respect me. Even if you see me as an enemy. Because the reality is that I don't desire any harm for anyone that doesn't see things the way I do. But the moment that I evoke these words and I say that I follow Christ and not man, man wants to hate me for what I believe. Even though I'm evoking the one that died so that we can live. Even though I'm evoking the one that they say and they claim to be saved by. So you see, it's what people say and it's what the fruits show. And I'm no one's puppet or minion. And you can't bow me down. You can't tie me down. I'm not yours to keep. My big bro is Jesus Christ. My Lord and Savior is Jesus Christ. My guide, my blueprint. Who, the only one that is worthy of being followed. The only righteous one. How dare anyone say? How can you evoke the Christ, the name of the Christ, the name of our Redeemer, and neglect everything that he said and did? Make it make sense. Bless you guys.